HOA used my driveway like it was their playground, ignored the signs, mocked me in public. So I found a 40-year-old deed clause and turned it into a government-backed trap. Now every HOA member has to pay just to pass my porch. They thought I was just a widow with a paintbrush. Turns out I own the road beneath their wheels. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. I used to think peace had a sound. For me, it was the low hum of my garden sprinkler at dawn, the rustle of maple leaves brushing against my porch columns, and the steady click of my old golden retriever's paws on the hardwood. My name's Ellen Marks. I'm 68, a retired civil engineer, and a widow for 7 years now. I live in a modest, sun-warmed home at the end of Brookstone Drive, a cul-de-sac tucked quietly into the kind of suburb where nothing ever really happens. That was the appeal. I paid off this house 15 years ago. My husband, Gerald, and I poured our sweat into it. He handled the deck. I handled the structural drawings. We even regraded the driveway together one summer, pouring fresh gravel in matching sun hats. It's not just a stretch of concrete to me, it's memory. It's mine. The HOA was always there, but like an old screen door, annoying, sometimes squeaky, but harmless. They sent newsletters full of clip art and clumsy metaphors about community unity, occasionally cited someone over mailbox height or lawn length, but mostly they kept to themselves, until last spring. That was the first time I saw the banner. Brookstone Spring Block Party. Open to all. I wasn't against it. Heck, I baked a tray of lemon squares and brought out some extra chairs. It felt neighborly. Kids laughed. The Johnsons set up a bounce house, and someone even played bluegrass on a portable amp. My only gripe was the cars. Dozens of them lined up like a dealership showroom, overflowing from the cul-de-sac and pressing into every available driveway, including mine. I shrugged it off. One day, no big deal. But then came the Summer Sizzle Social, and after that, the Harvest Fest. Suddenly there were monthly events, each bigger than the last. It wasn't long before I noticed tire marks across my gravel, a soda can left crushed by my hedges, crumbs and lollipop sticks under my mailbox. I repainted the private driveway sign. Gerald and I had staked years ago twice. Both times, it vanished the very next day. The final straw? A stranger mid-30s, Bluetooth in ear, probably a volunteer or low-level coordinator, actually waved cars onto my driveway during the Winter Wonderland mixer. I opened the door and politely told him this was private property. He smiled without looking me in the eye and said, "We've just got overflow. Thanks for being flexible." Then turned away. The next day, I attended my first HOA meeting in 5 years. I walked into the community center hall with a notebook in hand and a quiet sense of resolve. I wasn't expecting hostility. I was expecting maybe a conversation. What I got was something else entirely. The president, Monica Feldman, tall, well-coiffed, always smelling faintly of cinnamon gum, smiled wide and fake, then laughed when I brought up the driveway. "Ellen," she said, gesturing vaguely to the crowd, "we're all just trying to enjoy the neighborhood. Let's not be the house that says no to joy." Someone actually clapped. A few people chuckled. I felt heat crawl up my neck. No apology, no acknowledgement, just this unspoken consensus that my property was theirs to commandeer whenever they saw fit, because I didn't have kids, because I was alone, because I didn't push back hard enough when it first happened. On the walk home, I looked at that gravel path differently. I'd built that driveway with my own hands. I'd edged it with river stone and seeded wild grass along the slope. I'd paid every cent of tax on that parcel, and now I was being told, essentially, that it didn't really belong to me anymore. That night, I repainted the private driveway sign again. The next morning, it was gone, but I'd learned something. If they could pretend my property was public, maybe I could treat it like something else too. Something they wouldn't like one bit. After the Winter Wonderland mixer, I knew better than to rely on signs. Words painted on wood weren't going to stop them. So I decided it was time for something more durable, something that couldn't be ignored or easily taken down. I installed 2 motion-activated cameras, one mounted under the awning, pointed square at the driveway entrance, the other tucked behind a hedgerow, disguised inside a birdhouse my husband had built. I didn't tell anyone, Didn't need to. Let the lens speak for itself. The footage came in fast. The first week alone, 12 different cars parked partially or completely on my driveway. 4 of them during weekday evenings, nothing to do with events. Just people treating my property like overflow. One of them even pulled up, parked crooked, and got out with grocery bags, like this was their personal loading zone. Another time, a woman wheeled a stroller right down the center of the gravel, smiling like it was part of a public walking trail. But the worst, watching Monica Feldman, yes, HOA President Monica, in broad daylight, walk the cul-de-sac in yoga pants and designer sunglasses, point to my driveway, and direct cars onto it during the HOA's Valentine social. I downloaded the clip, named it Feldman Directs Trespass 2 under 14 dumb P4. That became my system. I logged everything, timestamped it. License plates, make and model, duration of stay. I even recorded whether someone littered. The data filled folders on my desktop like digital ammunition. But I didn't act yet. Not publicly. First, I sent 3 letters. Certified mail, return receipts. Calm, professional. Just like I used to write to subcontractors back in my project manager days. Each letter kindly reminded them that the driveway was private property, not part of the HOA's common areas, and that their continued use constituted trespass. I attached a copy of the title deed for emphasis. No response. Well, not directly. At the next HOA meeting, I attended again. Thought maybe this time they'd act like adults. I sat in the 3rd row, legal pad in my lap, neutral expression on my face. Monica opened the meeting with a joke. "I want to remind everyone to be extra neighborly these days," she said with a bright smile. "Especially those of us with sensitive driveways." Polite laughter rippled across the room. Someone behind me muttered, "Maybe she should put up lasers." Another voice added, "Or dig a moat." I turned but didn't speak. I just looked. Monica continued, "We've received some concerns again about event parking. But, as we all know, we are a shared community, and the board believes in promoting cooperation over complaints." I raised my hand. She didn't call on me. That night, I walked home under a sky full of stars and thought, so that's how it's gonna be. They weren't just ignoring me. They were mocking me. Turning my legitimate boundary into a punchline. It wasn't just frustrating anymore. It was isolating. I had neighbors I'd waved to for years. People I'd fed cookies to, whose kids I'd watched grow up, now whispering when I passed. A few even stopped waving altogether. I became that lady with the cameras. The one who overreacted. I felt invisible and exposed at the same time. Then came the newsletter. Folded in my mailbox, glossy and smug. Brookstone Community Monthly. On the second page, there it was, a photo of the last event, with a dozen residents gathered in folding chairs, and right there in the background, clear as a postcard, my driveway. The caption, "What a turnout. Thank you for your generous space." I stared at that word, generous. They knew exactly what they were doing. So I changed tactics. I stopped going to meetings. Instead, I buried myself in legal reading, property law forums, case histories. I studied every term: prescriptive easement, adverse possession, non-consensual encroachment. I found statutes, highlighted paragraphs. I built a dossier so thick it could pass for a college thesis. One case stood out. A woman in Oregon who successfully sued her HOA for overstepping property boundaries and was granted punitive damages. Another in Texas, where the court ruled that repeated trespass, even by neighbors, constituted civil liability when documented thoroughly. I printed them all, labeled them, filed them next to the footage, the letters, the HOA charter, and the title deed. If they wanted to pretend my land was theirs, I'd show them what real ownership looked like. It started with a drawer I hadn't opened in years. It was in Gerald's old roll-top desk. Second drawer on the right, beneath his fishing magazines and some faded Polaroids of our road trips out west. I was looking for a tax receipt, something unrelated, but what I found was dust thick and heavy with time. A folder. Manila. Faded red label across the tab. Right-of-way rejected. I paused. Ran my hand across the cover. I didn't remember seeing this after he passed. Maybe I avoided it. Maybe part of me just wasn't ready to go digging into the business side of our life. But that title, rejected right-of-way, That rang a bell. I pulled the folder open, careful not to rip the brittle paper. Inside was a survey map, crisp blue ink on thin drafting vellum. It showed our property in full: the house, the shed, the garden beds, and the driveway. Only it wasn't labeled as a dead end. It connected two public roads. Not visually. You wouldn't know it just by looking. Trees bordered the rear of the property, giving it the illusion of a hard stop. But on that map, our gravel strip extended just a few more yards past the rear line, technically linking up with Cedar Ridge Drive on the far side. A small passage, enough for one lane. Narrow but navigable. I blinked at the highlighted margin notes in Gerald's neat engineer script. Request denied, no public easement granted. Retain private rights. He had tried once. Or maybe the county had. Either way, it was rejected, which meant what I'd always believed was true. The driveway was fully, legally mine. No access rights, no easements, no shared use permissions, just one narrow stretch of gravel that I owned, front to back. Then I found the clause. It was on the original title deed, a yellowing page folded neatly in a plastic sleeve. I read it 3 times to be sure. No portion of the parcel may be used for ingress or egress without the express written consent of the property holder. I sat back, heart suddenly thudding. This wasn't just about a few parked cars anymore. This was a boundary that could be defended in court, and not just that. It was a choke point, a strategic corridor, and the HOA had been funneling their events, their guests, their garbage, their noise, right through my leverage. Then came the idea. A twisted, brilliant, engineer-minded idea. Gerald would have grinned at. If my driveway connected 2 public streets and wasn't under HOA control, what if I treated it like a road? Not a neighborhood driveway, a throughway. What if I offered it to the county? I didn't say it out loud, not yet, just wrote it down on a yellow notepad. Public use potential, county utility access, toll possibility. The folder in front of me shifted from artifact to blueprint. That blueprint from 1984, once stamped access denied, like a dead end, was now a door, a key. Maybe even a fuse. They thought they'd buried me in policy. They didn't realize I had the original plans. And now, I had something even better than outrage. I had options. There's something oddly thrilling about walking into a government building with a plan no one sees coming. It was a Wednesday morning, quiet and overcast, when I first drove down to the county transportation office. I didn't tell anyone. No calls. No emails, just packed up my folder thick with footage, property maps, and highlighted statutes, and headed into the lion's den with the calm of someone holding every card. I checked in at the front desk, and 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from a planner named Alex Renner. Mid-40s, wire-rimmed glasses, a nervous energy that told me he'd rather be crunching numbers than talking to strangers. That worked just fine for me. I've got something a little unusual, I said, laying out the survey map on the table. He looked it over, brow furrowing. I slid over the title deed next. Then came the folder of footage. Here's what's happening, I said, keeping my voice level. This strip, I tapped the driveway, connects 2 public roads. It's privately owned, and it's being used illegally by a third party without consent. He nodded slowly. The HOA? Exactly. They treat it like it's part of their event space. I've got 2 years' worth of documentation, trespass incidents, community misuse, public access without permission. But here's what I'm offering. I pulled out a typed proposal, 3 crisp pages. I'm willing to sell the strip to the county for use as a gated utility access and emergency cut-through. It's already load-bearing, structurally intact. It just needs a curb cut and a sensor system. You get a pre-existing access route. I get compensation. Win-win. He blinked. You'd donate the land. Sell, I corrected, smiling thinly. Or lease? Or better yet, turn it into a toll-eligible municipal passage. You install a booth, charge non-residents, use proceeds for road maintenance. I'll even support the measure publicly if it comes to that. Alex stared at the documents like I'd handed him a live grenade wrapped in ribbon. This could work, he murmured. You've got no HOA easements. Clean title. This would technically qualify under Urban Access Reinforcement Code. He flipped through a few pages, but it won't be fast. There's permitting, zoning, legal review. At least 60 days, maybe more. That's fine, I said. Start the clock. As I stood to leave, I handed him a flash drive. Every file, every date, every name, just in case someone tries to get creative. He gave a cautious nod. You sure you want to go through with this? I looked him dead in the eye. Absolutely. The next week, the Brookstone HOA newsletter hit mailboxes again. Glossy cover, spring-themed. A cartoon sun beaming over a clip-art grill. Headline, Summer Block Bash Returns. I didn't even have to read the article to know. Back in full swing. Bigger than last year. They planned to set up a bounce house again, right next to my driveway. The same space I was now actively turning into a municipal toll road. There was something almost poetic in their ignorance. They were prepping face paint stations, while I was handing over ownership rights to the county. Scheduling a dunk tank while a survey crew was quietly flagged to inspect the rear perimeter of my land. They didn't notice the discreet orange markers placed near the back edge, or the unassuming city SUV that drove past 3 times that week, snapping elevation photos from the curb. Why would they? People drunk on power rarely look down. I didn't confront anyone, didn't make threats. I just watched, waited. Iced tea on the porch, journal in my lap. Every so often, I'd glance at the calendar and smile, because I knew something they didn't. Once I filed my intent to sell, the county had legal precedents to seize the strip via municipal acquisition. Not forcibly, just procedurally. In the name of public interest. And once that happened, the HOA wouldn't be negotiating with a widow anymore. They'd be negotiating with local government. And here's the best part. They wouldn't know it until the signs went up. The morning of the summer block bash dawned hot and loud. By 7:45 a.m., I could already hear the thump of bass-heavy music echoing off the rooftops. Someone was unloading folding tables from a pickup 2 doors down. The unmistakable shriek of duct tape being pulled rang out like a starting pistol. From my porch, I could see it all. Balloon arches, plastic flamingos, a cotton candy machine being wheeled onto a front lawn. And then, of course, Monica Feldman. Right on cue. She came striding up the cul-de-sac in a coral blazer and platform sandals, headset slung over her perfectly ironed bob, clipboard tucked under one arm like a general surveying her troops. She didn't look left or right. Why would she? In her mind, this neighborhood was a kingdom. And my driveway, just one more brick in her castle. She turned the corner and stopped cold. There, in the center of my driveway, where her volunteers usually parked their SUVs and barbecue grills, stood a fully operational county toll booth. A small white structure, modest but unmistakably official, with a digital price screen that blinked. $5 per vehicle, county access fee. A pair of workers in reflective vests moved with quiet efficiency, bolting the final sign into the gravel. No trespassing. Under county jurisdiction. I sipped my tea. Monica's face cycled through every stage of disbelief, confusion, realization, denial, and finally rage. She stomped up the driveway, headset flailing as she gestured wildly at the booth. "What is this?" she barked at one of the workers. The younger of the two smiled calmly and handed her a folded packet. "Installation permit, ma'am. County approved. You'll also find the rate sheet and contact info for the transportation board." "I didn't authorize this," she snapped, eyes narrowing at me across the lawn. "You didn't need to," I said, rising from my chair. "This is county land now. They bought the driveway." Technically, I had signed a conditional easement transfer, a rare clause that allowed the county to claim maintenance and jurisdiction rights over the strip as a limited access route while still compensating me annually. But that wasn't her business. She stepped back, trying to find footing. You can't just, this is our event." "Not on my property," I said, "and not without paying the toll." The silence around us grew. The bounce house crew stopped inflating. Someone turned down the music. A mother holding a tray of cookies whispered something to her husband. Eyes locked on the booth like it was radioactive. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. A black SUV pulled up. One of Monica's volunteers late to the party. She slowed at the booth, window down. The county worker leaned in. "That'll be $5, ma'am." The volunteer blinked. "What?" "County access fee." just for the day. She glanced at Monica, confused. Monica gave a frantic wave and mouthed, "Just go." The woman dug in her purse. Paid. The gate lifted. And just like that, it began. One by one, HOA guests and volunteers were met with the same polite smile and the same digital toll screen. Some turned around. Others paid, grumbling. A few stormed off. I watched it unfold like theater, one where I already knew the ending. Before the booth closed that evening, it had collected over 300. That night, I replaced my old wooden sign, the one that kept getting stolen, with something better. A sleek aluminum placard, bolted to the fence. Profit managed by county. No unauthorized access. I looked at it for a long time. The driveway was still mine, but now it meant something. They called me unneighborly. I didn't argue. I just started charging rent. I expected a counterpunch. Arrogance like Monica's doesn't retreat quietly. Sure enough, within 10 days of the toll booth's installation, I received notice. The Brookstone Homeowners Association had filed a formal complaint with the county zoning board, claiming I had illegally commercialized residential property. The wording was rich. They accused me of violating community cohesion, of obstructing HOA traditions. They said I was causing emotional distress to residents by forcing them to pay to attend family-friendly events. And then came the best part. They cited my own driveway as a shared neighborhood resource. I laughed out loud when I read that one. Bold, considering I had the sign title, county permit, and a small mountain of time-stamped evidence proving otherwise. Still, I didn't underestimate them. HOA boards have friends in odd places. Petty power has a way of making noise. So I retained legal counsel. A former land use attorney named Rhonda Gates, sharp as a whip, with a voice like she filed restraining orders for sport. She reviewed the case file, flipped through the HOA's complaint, and said with a smirk, "This is like trying to sue a fire hydrant for being wet." Still, we prepared, filed our own response, gathered copies of the conditional easement transfer, the footage, the letters I'd sent before they mocked me publicly, the photos from the newsletter showing my driveway featured as a backdrop for their events. The hearing was set for a Thursday morning in a cramped administrative courtroom downtown. Nothing dramatic, just a modest room with fluorescent lighting, 2 flags and a 3-person panel at the head. Monica arrived with a lawyer in tow, some boutique HOA specialist from 2 towns over. She wore navy slacks and brought a manila folder, too thin to be dangerous. I sat with Rhonda at my side, calm but coiled. Their lawyer started by claiming I'd disrupted the intentional harmony of the Brookstone community, that my driveway was never in question, that its use had been communal and accepted for years, therefore implied as shared. Rhonda let him talk. Then she stood. "Brookstone HOA," she said clearly, "never requested nor secured an easement over Miss Mark's property. In fact," she held up the title, "they are explicitly excluded from access without written consent." This wasn't communal use. It was trespass. The board members glanced at one another. Then came the moment that ended it. The panel asked the HOA lawyer a direct question. "Were you, or the HOA, aware that the driveway in question was not part of common property?" He answered too quickly. "Of course. That's never been contested." Rhonda's pen stopped mid-note. She turned to the panel. "Let the record reflect counsel admits knowledge that the HOA knowingly used non-HOA property for sanctioned events without permission. That's not just misuse. That's willful violation." Game, set, match. The panel ruled in our favor that afternoon. The toll booth remained. The county's jurisdiction stood. And the HOA's complaint, dismissed as both unfounded and contradictory to their own governance documents. But the fallout didn't stop there. Because the HOA, having sanctioned years of events using my driveway as a functional part of their plans, was now in breach of their own charter. Specifically, the financial clause, any misuse of community funds or unauthorized obligations had to be reimbursed. That included every toll paid during their events. So the board was forced to issue a reimbursement, cutting checks out of the HOA's own budget to cover toll costs for members who'd paid to attend their shared celebrations. The irony, the same residents who had once laughed at me for being unneighborly were now emailing the board, asking why their dues had been spent bailing out a legal mess. The newsletter that month skipped the usual pastel colors. It was a bland white PDF with an update on HOA procedures and a note that all event planning would be paused indefinitely, pending legal review. No apology, no mention of the hearing, just silence. But silence suited me just fine. I took that month's reimbursement check and framed it. Not for the money, for the principle. They tried to paint me as the villain. All I did was stand my ground. Legally, quietly, and with more patience than they ever deserved. They built their empire on borrowed ground. I just called in the deed. I never expected it to go beyond the cul-de-sac. The whole thing felt so small, so petty, so local. Just one woman defending her gravel driveway from a pack of clipboard tyrants. But vindication has a funny way of growing legs when you least expect it. It started with a knock on the door. A young woman in a navy windbreaker microphone clipped to her lapel, holding a camera operator at her side. "Hi, Miss Marks. I'm with Channel 12. Mind if we ask you a few questions about the new toll road?" I blinked. "You mean the driveway?" She smiled. "The one that made the HOA eat their own words." "Yeah, that one. They'd gotten wind of the county hearing somehow, maybe a clerk leaked it. Or maybe someone inside the HOA tipped them off out of spite. Either way, I agreed to the interview. Sat on the porch with my hands folded, tea in a ceramic mug, while she asked polite but pointed questions. When the piece aired 3 nights later, I nearly choked on my dinner. HOA Miju's private driveway owner sells it to county as toll road. That was the headline. They played the security footage, Monica waving cars onto my property. They showed the court ruling, the title deed with the easement clause highlighted in yellow. And then, in one of the most poetic moments I've ever witnessed, they cut to B-roll of the toll booth, its LED screen glowing quietly while car after car stopped, paid, and passed through. The segment ended with a shot of me watering the garden. The voiceover called me a soft-spoken property owner with a fierce grasp of the law. I never smiled so hard in my life. Within 48 hours, it hit local forums. Then Facebook. Then a regional news aggregator picked it up. Suddenly, Brookstone wasn't just a quiet suburb. It was a case study in HOA overreach. And the fallout came fast. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years began knocking on my door. Some brought cookies. Others just said, "I'm sorry. We didn't know." I could see it in their eyes. The guilt. The shift. The whisper network had turned. The stories Monica used to spin didn't hold anymore. People wanted the truth. And the truth was televised. Behind the scenes, the HOA scrambled. They issued a formal statement, wordy and bland, full of legal fog and empty reassurances. But it was too late. The image was burned in, Monica standing helpless in front of a toll booth. She couldn't move, flanked by county workers with clipboards. Then the rumor hit. One of the board members, Jim Haley, treasurer, resigned abruptly. No explanation, no farewell note. Just gone. Whispers said he'd misallocated community funds during the reimbursement process. Others said he'd tried to forge easement paperwork retroactively. No one could prove it, but the silence was deafening. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like the odd one out. I felt like the last honest person in a neighborhood built on convenience and fake smiles. The driveway hadn't just been a line in the gravel, it had been a boundary of dignity. And now, with the world watching, they couldn't erase it. I hadn't planned on attending the meeting. Part of me wanted to let it play out from a distance, watch the house of cards fall without ever setting foot inside the room. But something inside me, something quiet but insistent, told me to be there. Not for spectacle, not for applause, for closure. It was held in the community center, same room where Monica once laughed off my complaint, where neighbors snickered and muttered about moats and lasers. But this time, the folding chairs were full. A different energy buzzed through the space. Focused. Tense. Less like a party, more like a trial. A member-led petition had gathered enough signatures to trigger a board-wide vote, something buried deep in the HOA bylaws under Section 9 Community Oversight. Fitting, the same charter they used to ignore me was now the sword pointed at their own backs. I took a seat in the last row, right by the exit. No speech, no fuss. Just me, a notepad, and a pen I never uncapped. The roll call began. First up, Jim Haley, treasurer, officially resigned but still listed, voted out with near unanimous support. Next, Sandra Powell, events coordinator, the one who once parked her catering truck across my front hedge, voted out. Then, David Krantz, communications, voted out. And finally, Monica Feldman. She stood at the front of the room, clipboard trembling slightly in her hands. She wore her usual blazer, but the headset was gone. No command this time, just a woman cornered by her own consequences. The final tally, she read, voice brittle, shows 73 in favor of board dissolution, 14 against. The measure passes. Silence. Then light clapping, no cheers, no gloating, just the sound of a chapter closing. She didn't look at me, but I saw it in her posture. The slump of someone who realized too late that leadership built on ego is only ever temporary. After the vote, a new interim committee took the stage. Younger, more transparent, a few familiar faces who'd once looked away but now looked me in the eye. They began with a statement. We'd like to formally apologize to Ms. Ellen Marks for the mishandling of her property rights, and for the lack of professionalism shown by the previous board. Effective immediately, the HOA will be suspending all event budgeting until proper compliance reviews are completed. Applause this time. Respectful. Earned. Then came the twist I never expected. One of the new board members, a man named Theo Klein, a quiet retired attorney I'd barely spoken to over the years, approached me afterward with a tentative smile. Ms. Marks, I know you're not looking for any spotlight, he said. But the truth is, we could use your help. Would you consider consulting with us going forward, just to make sure nothing like this ever happens again? I paused. The same HOA that once mocked me now wanted me to guide them, not out of obligation, but out of recognition. I gave a soft nod. As long as you keep things legal, I'll keep things fair. We shook hands. I walked home that evening under a soft gold sky, past the toll booth still standing silent, watch over my gravel, the aluminum sign catching the last light of the day. No parade, no revenge speech, just peace. The kind you earn by never backing down. Most mornings now start the same. I brew a pot of Earl Grey, slice up a lemon, and carry my glass out to the porch just as the sun slides past the neighbor's chimney. It's quieter than it used to be. No inflatable castles. No shrieking megaphones. Just birds, wind, and the steady hum of a new kind of order. From where I sit, I have a perfect view of the toll booth. It stands like a sentry at the edge of my old driveway. Paint fresh, LED screen blinking soft blue, sensor pole casting a long shadow across the gravel. County workers come by once a month for maintenance. Always polite. One of them even planted flowers at the base of the booth, after seeing me do the same on my porch rail. Every so often, a car rolls up. Usually someone from the HOA. I can tell by the license plates. The same people who once pretended my driveway was a public amenity now slow to a crawl, hold up their toll cards to the scanner, and wait for the soft beep that says they've paid. The gate lifts. The light turns green. I take a sip of lemonade and smile. 20 years. That's how long the county contract runs. Every quarter I get a direct deposit, my small share of the passage fee, enough to keep the garden blooming and the house repaired. The rest goes to local infrastructure. Potholes fixed, drainage upgraded. Ironically, even the roads leading into Brookstone have never been smoother. Some of the neighbors still can't make eye contact. Others wave now, awkward but trying. A few have genuinely come around, offering their thanks, dropping off plants or fresh bread. I don't hold grudges, not anymore. Not when I'm living on the other side of closure. Because the truth is, I didn't win by fighting louder. I won by holding the line. By understanding that the law, when wielded with precision and patience, doesn't need volume. It just needs the truth, properly documented. Gerald would have loved this. Not the conflict, he never liked drama. But the geometry of it? The symmetry. A driveway we poured ourselves. Gravel wheelbarrowed one afternoon under a blazing July sun, now turned into a literal pathway of accountability. What was once trampled is now respected, regulated, taxed, and protected by county jurisdiction. The ultimate irony. Monica still lives in the neighborhood. Her house backs onto the same street as the toll lane's exit. And every Friday when her gardener pulls up with his truck and trailer, he uses the booth to loop through. $5. Every time. No HOA event, no community pass. Just access. Legal, metered, untouchable. The aluminum sign still stands by the fence. County access route, unauthorized side entry prohibited. Funny how one line of text can change everything. I sit back and watch as another SUV approaches the booth, its driver's side windows sliding down, card held out without hesitation. No argument, no debate, just the silent agreement of systems correcting themselves. The green light blinks again, and I smile. They called me unneighborly. Now I'm their landlord. Ever had your rights trampled by a clipboard and a fake smile? This isn't just a driveway, it's a warning. Because when you weaponize paperwork, even the HOA pays rent. Stick around, the next battle might be on your lawn. And trust me, there's always a loophole they forgot to read.